Welcome back to the English Oasis. We've talked about finding your flow and the power of saying no. But today, we address the biggest excuse of all, the giant wall that stops millions of learners before they even start. That excuse is, I don't have enough time. We live in a world that worships the grand gesture. We think that to learn English, we need to move to London for a year or study for 5 hours every weekend. We wait for the perfect moment that never comes. But what if I told you that greatness isn't built in marathons? It's built in millimeters. Today, we look at the story of Sarah and the law that governs the universe. The 1% rule. Part 1. The myth of the big leap. Sarah was a 3-5-year-old marketing manager and a mother of 2 young children. Her life was a masterpiece of chaos. Her day started at 6 a.m. with crying toddlers and ended at 11 p.m. with laundry and work emails. For years, Sarah had a dream. She wanted to be able to read professional journals in English and speak confidently during international Zoom calls. Every January, Sarah would make a grand resolution. She would buy a $200 online course, promise to study for 2 hours every night, and buy 5 thick English novels. And every year, by January 15th, she had failed. Sarah was a victim of the all-or-nothing fallacy. She believed that if she couldn't do it perfectly and intensely, it wasn't worth doing at all. When life got busy, when a child got sick or a deadline moved up, she would miss one day of her 2-hour schedule. That one missed day felt like a total defeat. She would think, well, I've ruined my streak. I'll just start again next month. She didn't realize that she was trapped in a cycle of intensity versus consistency. One rainy Tuesday, Sarah was sitting in her car, exhausted. She had exactly 10 minutes before she had to pick up her kids from school. She looked at her English textbook on the passenger seat. It felt like a heavy, judgmental ghost. She thought, I can't open that. I only have 10 minutes. What's the point of 10 minutes? I can't learn anything in 10 minutes. But that afternoon, she happened to listen to a short clip about James Clear and the concept of atomic habits. Clear argues that if you get 1% better at something every day, you will be 37 times better by the end of 1 year. The math hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. She realized she had been trying to climb a mountain in one giant leap. And of course, she was falling. What if she stopped trying to be perfect and just tried to be 1% better? What if she stopped looking for 2 hours and started looking for 10 minutes? She did a quick calculation. If she studied for just 15 minutes a day, every day, that would be nearly 100 hours of English in a year. 100 hours was more than she had studied in the last 5 years combined. Sarah decided to conduct an experiment. She called it the 1-5-minute minimum. Her goal was no longer to be fluent. Her goal was simply to not break the chain of 15 minutes. She realized that the biggest enemy of progress isn't a lack of talent. It's the friction of starting. When you tell your brain you have to work for 2 hours, your brain resists. It feels like a chore. But when you tell your brain, it's just 15 minutes, then we can stop. The resistance vanishes. Sarah looked at her life not as a solid block of busy, but as a series of gaps. The 10 minutes waiting for the kids, the 5 minutes waiting for the coffee to brew, the 15 minutes on the train. These were her golden minutes. She went home that night and did something radical. She put her giant 500-page textbook in the closet. She downloaded a simple news app in English and a podcast app. She was moving away from intensity and toward systematization. She didn't know it yet, but by lowering the bar, she was actually raising her ceiling. She was about to discover the magic of compound interest, where small, boring actions turn into massive, visible results. The journey of 1,000 miles didn't start with a single step. It started with the decision to keep stepping, no matter how small the step was. Part 2. The architecture of tiny habit. Sarah began her 1% journey on a Wednesday. Her first 15 minutes happened in the most unglamorous place possible. The kitchen, while she was waiting for the microwave to heat up her lunch. Instead of scrolling through social media, which was her usual brain-dead habit, she opened a 5-minute English podcast about marketing trends. She listened. She understood maybe 60% of it. When the microwave beeped, she didn't stop. She took her lunch to the table and finished the remaining 5 minutes of the podcast. Total time: 10 minutes. Mental effort: low. Sense of accomplishment: high. For the first time in her life, Sarah didn't feel guilty about English. She felt efficient. She began to use a technique called habit stacking. The rule is simple. You identify a current habit you do every day, and you stack your new English habit on top of it. After I pour my first cup of coffee, I will read one English headline. After I put the kids to bed, I will write 3 sentences in my English journal. After I start the car for my commute, I will hit play on my English audiobook. By stacking English onto things she was already doing, Sarah removed the need for willpower. Willpower is a limited resource. If you have a stressful day at work, your willpower is gone by 6 p.m. But habits? Habits are automatic. You don't need willpower to brush your teeth, and Sarah was turning English into something as automatic as brushing her teeth. In the second week, Sarah faced her first crisis. Her daughter got a fever. The house was a mess. She had a mountain of work. The old Sarah would have quit. She would have said, "I don't have time for English today. I'm too stressed." But the 1% Sarah remembered the rule. Never miss twice. She realized that the most important days aren't the days when everything goes perfectly. The most important days are the bad days. If you study when you're tired, you're training your brain that English is a non-negotiable part of your identity. She sat on the edge of her daughter's bed at 11:30 p.m. She was exhausted. She took her phone and watched a 2-minute English video about how to stay calm. That was it. 2 minutes. Most people would say, 2 minutes is useless. You can't learn a language in 2 minutes. But they are wrong. Those 2 minutes weren't about learning vocabulary. They were about maintaining the identity. Sarah was proving to herself that she was the kind of person who never misses. Psychologically, this is called identity-based habits. When you focus on the outcome, becoming fluent, you get discouraged easily. When you focus on the identity, being a daily learner, every small action is a vote for that new person. Each 5-minute session was a vote for the English-speaking Sarah. By the end of the first month, something strange happened. Sarah found that 15 minutes often turned into 20. Once she started, the friction was gone. The hardest part of working out is putting on your running shoes. The hardest part of English is opening the app. Once Sarah opened the app for just 15 minutes, her curiosity often kept her there for longer. She was no longer trying to study. She was in the rhythm. She was beginning to see that the 1% rule isn't just about math. It's about psychology. It's about removing the grand gesture and replacing it with the atomic action. And as the days turned into weeks, those atomic actions were starting to fuse together into something powerful. Part 3. The Plateau of Latent Potential. By the end of the second month, Sarah hit a wall. It wasn't a wall of business, but a wall of frustration. She had been consistent. She had followed her 1 5-minute minimum every single day. She had listened to 40 podcasts and read dozens of articles. But when she tried to speak in a work meeting, she still felt slow. She still struggled to find the right words. She still felt average. She felt like she was pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. "I'm doing the 1%?" she complained to herself. "But where is the 37 times improvement? I feel the same as I did 60 days ago." This is the most dangerous moment in any journey of growth. James Clear calls it the Plateau of Latent Potential. Most people expect progress to be a straight, diagonal line. You put in a little work, you get a little result. But in reality, progress is exponential. It stays flat for a long time, and then, suddenly, it shoots upward. Sarah was currently in the valley of disappointment. This is the space between what you expect to happen and what is actually happening. During this time, your work isn't being wasted. It is being stored. Think of an ice cube sitting in a room that is negative 5 degrees Celsius. You heat the room to negative 4 degrees. Nothing happens. You heat it to negative 3, then negative 2, then negative 1. The ice cube is still a solid block of ice. To an outside observer, it looks like nothing is changing. But then you hit 0 degrees. Suddenly, the ice melts. The shift from negative 1 to 0 degrees caused a massive change, but that change was only possible because of all the heating that happened before it. Sarah's 15 minutes were her degrees of heating. She was raising the temperature of her English skills, but she hadn't hit the melting point yet. One evening, while she was doing the dishes and listening to an English interview with a famous entrepreneur, Sarah heard a complex phrase. The sheer scale of the infrastructure was unprecedented. 2 months ago, that sentence would have been a blur of noise. But tonight, she didn't just understand it. She felt the structure of the sentence. She didn't translate it. She simply knew it. She realized that while her output, speaking, was still lagging, her input, understanding, had undergone a silent revolution. Her brain was building neural density. Every 1 5-minute session was like adding a single thread to a giant tapestry. You can't see the picture when you've only added 10 threads. You can't even see it after 100. But at some point, the threads reach a critical mass and the image suddenly becomes clear. Sarah decided to change her metric of success. She stopped asking, "How well did I speak today?" and started asking, "Did I show up today?" She began to treat her English habit like a sunk cost. She wasn't doing it for a future reward anymore. She was doing it because it was who she was. She also learned about the diffusion of innovation in her own brain. New words and structures were diffusing into her subconscious. She stopped trying to pull the English out of her head and started letting it settle in. She noticed that her gaps, those 10 or 1 5-minute windows, had become the most peaceful parts of her day. Because the pressure of perfection was gone, she was finally in the flow state we talked about with Elena. She was no longer fighting the language. She was marinating in it. The valley of disappointment is where the grand gesture learners quit. They see no results after 2 weeks of intensity, and they give up. But Sarah, with her atomic habit, had a secret weapon. Her bar was so low that it was harder to quit than it was to continue. She kept heating the room. -1 degree. -0. 5 degrees. She was inches away from the melting point, and for the first time in her life, she had the patience to wait for the heat to do its work. She realized that the 1% rule isn't just a math hack. It's a contract with your future self. You do the boring, invisible work today so that the future you can enjoy the sudden success tomorrow. Sarah was no longer a woman trying to learn English. She was a woman who was building a system. And as any engineer will tell you, once the system is built, the results take care of themselves. Part 4. The breakthrough, the melting point. It happened on a Thursday morning, 6 months into Sarah's journey of atomic habits. There was no warning. There was no time to prepare. Sarah was in the middle of a routine marketing meeting when her director suddenly announced, "The lead strategist from our London branch is joining us today to discuss the global rollout." "Sarah, since you've been handling the regional data, I'd like you to lead the second half of the presentation." A year ago, this sentence would have triggered a full-blown panic attack. Sarah's old self would have spent the next 10 minutes frantically typing translations into Google, her heart racing, her sweat turning cold. But today, something strange happened. Her heart rate stayed steady. She felt a calm, quiet confidence that she didn't recognize. As the London strategist, a man with a sharp, fast-paced accent, began to ask complex questions about market penetration and consumer demographics, Sarah didn't have to strain to understand. Her brain, which had been marinating in 5-minute intervals of English podcasts for 180 days straight, simply opened the door. The noise had become music. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't reach for a script. She didn't think about the present perfect or the third conditional. She just spoke. The words didn't come from her conscious study brain. They flowed from her implicit memory. Based on the recent trends we've observed, she began, her voice clear and resonant. The 1% increase in our conversion rate is actually a leading indicator of a much larger shift. In the plateau of our latent potential, she stopped for a microsecond, surprised by her own choice of words. She had used the language of her 1% rule journey to describe her marketing data. She wasn't just using English. She was thinking in English. The strategist nodded, impressed. That's a sophisticated way to put it. Sarah, I agree. The latent potential is exactly what we need to tap into. The meeting lasted an hour. Sarah spoke for 20 minutes. She made mistakes. She missed a preposition here, a plural there, but she didn't stop. In the past, a single mistake would have acted like a speed bump, causing her to stumble and lose her confidence. But because she had practiced showing up on her tiredest, messiest days at home, she had built linguistic resilience. She knew that a mistake wasn't a failure. It was just a 1% ripple in a much larger ocean. After the call ended, her director pulled her aside. Sarah, your English has become incredibly sharp. When did you find the time to take a course? I know how busy you are with the kids. Sarah smiled. I didn't take a course, she said. I just stopped trying to climb the mountain and started focusing on the millimeters. This was her melting point. The ice hadn't turned into water because of what she did that morning. It turned into water because of the 15 minutes she spent in the car waiting for her kids. It turned into water because of the 2 minutes she spent at midnight when she was too tired to move. It turned into water because she had the courage to be imperfect every single day. She realized that the 1% rule had given her something much more valuable than vocabulary. It had given her the freedom of the system. Because she trusted the system, she no longer had to worry about the results. The results were now a byproduct of her identity. She walked back to her desk and looked at her phone. She had a notification from her English news app. Usually, she would read it as a task. But now, she read it because she was genuinely curious. The friction was gone. The study was gone. There was only growth. Sarah's breakthrough proves a fundamental law of the universe. Energy is never lost. It is only transformed. All those 5-minute sessions that felt useless at the time had been transformed into a new version of Sarah. She was no longer a mother trying to learn English. She was a marketing professional who was fluent in English. The 1% had finally added up to 100% of a new life. Part 5. The architecture of the impossible. Sarah's story doesn't end with a promotion or a successful meeting. It ends with a quiet realization that she is no longer the person she was 6 months ago. The 1% rule didn't just change her English. It changed her entire relationship with time. She stopped seeing time as a thief that steals her dreams and started seeing it as a soil in which she plants her seeds. As we conclude this episode of The English Oasis, I want you to look at your own life. Perhaps you are where Sarah was, exhausted, overwhelmed, and feeling like the mountain of English is too steep to climb. You've been waiting for a miracle, a grand gesture, or a month of free time that never comes. But here is the hard, beautiful truth. The miracle is in the mundane. The 1% rule is the only way to achieve the impossible. Why? Because the 1% rule is the only method that accounts for the fact that you are human. Let's break down the Atomic English Masterclass. The 3 laws that Sarah used to build her 37x improvement. Law 1. Lower the hurdle until it's impossible to fail. Most people fail because their goals are too big for their current level of willpower. They say, I will study for an hour. But on a rainy Monday, when the boss is angry and the kids are crying, an hour feels like a lifetime. Sarah's secret was the 1-5-minute minimum. You must make your daily goal so small that you can do it even on your worst day, even when you have a headache, even when you are depressed. If you can't do 15 minutes, do 5. If you can't do 5, do 1. The goal isn't the amount of learning. The goal is the unbroken chain. Once you master the art of showing up, the learning takes care of itself. Law 2. Focus on systems, not goals. A goal is a destination, like I want to be C1. A system is a process, like I listen to English for 15 minutes while I make coffee. Winners and losers often have the same goals. Every English learner wants to be fluent. So, the goal isn't what makes the difference. The difference is the system. Sarah stopped worrying about her level and started worrying about her routine. When you fall in love with the process, the results will find you. You don't attain fluency. You drift into it through the power of your daily systems. Law 3. The power of the bad day. This is the most important lesson of the 1% rule. Anyone can study when they are motivated. Anyone can study when they have a cup of coffee and a quiet room. But the people who achieve 37x growth are the ones who show up when they are not motivated. Remember Sarah sitting on the edge of her daughter's bed at midnight? Those 2 minutes were more valuable than a 4-hour seminar. Why? Because those 2 minutes maintained her identity. When you show up on a bad day, you are telling your subconscious, this is who I am now. I am a person who learns English. Period. The 1% rule works because it respects the law of compounding. Compounding is often called the 8th wonder of the world. It is the process by which a small action, repeated over time, creates an explosion of results. But compounding only works if you don't interrupt it. My friends, the reason you haven't reached your English goals yet isn't because you aren't smart enough. It's because you've been trying to be 100% better in a day instead of 1% better every day. You've been looking for the big leap, and you've been ignoring the small steps. Sarah is now a director at her firm. She speaks at international conferences. She reads books to her children in English. But if you ask her how she did it, she won't talk about intensity. She will show you her 1 5-minute timer. She will tell you about the podcasts she listened to while washing dishes. The unlived life we talked about in Mark's story is not reached by a jump. It is reached by a ladder made of tiny 1% rungs. So, as we close this episode, I have one question for you. What is your 1%? What is that one tiny atomic action you can do today, right now, before you go to sleep, that will move you 1 millimeter closer to the person you want to become? Don't wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow is a trap. Start today. Start small. Start with 1%, because 365 days from now, you will wake up and realize that the mountain is gone. Not because you jumped over it, but because you walked through it. One tiny, consistent step at a time. You have been listening to the story of Sarah and the magic of compound interest. I have a challenge for you. For the next 7 days, I want you to commit to the 1 5-minute minimum. No matter what happens, no matter how busy you are, find 15 minutes for English. What will your 1 5-minute habit be? Will it be a podcast while you drive? A news article while you eat? Share your 1% plan in the comments below. If Sarah's story gave you hope today, please share this episode with a busy friend who feels like they don't have enough time. Let's help them find their golden minutes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories from the English Oasis. Remember, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be 1% better than yesterday. Until next time, keep stepping and keep flowing.